Lenore Nazaki, October 25th, 1974, attacked at her doorstep and survived. Gloria Steele, October 30th, 1974, dead with 33 stab wounds to her chest. Shirley Small, April 1980, found deceased after repeatedly cut multiple times. Glenda Richmond, found dead near her doorway with 28 stab wounds to her body. Rebecca Greer, dead from 54 stab wounds. Lillian Tilley, dead from drowning. Michelle Mayday, dead from drowning. What do these women have in common? They were all brutally murdered by one of the worst serial killers in this country, Carl Eugene Watts, also known as the Sunday Morning Slasher. Starting early on, when he was 15, he confessed to attacking a female customer that was on his paper route simply because he felt like beating her up. This was only beginning for a serial killer with a very lengthy and shocking body count, but not a lot of notoriety with the general public. Many people have never heard of him despite being suspected in the murders of approximately 80 women. I know I personally have studied or throughout my years in college have gone over multiple serial murderers and as well as my career in law enforcement, and I've never heard of this man until this project had to be completed and I saw his name and I thought it was interesting. Watts' downhill spiral began when he was only 13 years old and was diagnosed with meningitis, causing high fevers and being forced to miss school for months. This caused him to be held back a grade and he was humiliated for it. What he lacked in intelligence, though, he made up for in aggression. All through school, he was getting in trouble for confronting students, mostly females. And in 1969, he was institutionalized, and it was discovered that his IQ was only around 70, and he was declared with a mild form of retardation. He also had frequent dreams as a teenager about torturing and killing girls. He got his first taste of death by hunting and skinning animals while growing up in Texas. Despite his low IQ and the humiliation he previously felt for failing along with being institutionalized, Carl excelled at sports, which unfortunately brought out his aggression. His athleticism was able to get him a scholarship to play football at Lane College located in Tennessee. His college career was short-lived, though, when he was expelled for stalking and sexual assault, and he was even the prime suspect of the murder of a female student there at the college. After being expelled, he was then accepted to a college program in Michigan, and again the attacks continued on female students. And again, Carl was the suspect, and he was investigated and institutionalized. After a series of murders in Michigan and Ontario, Canada, were committed, a detective from Texas passed on Carl Watts' information to Michigan authorities due to similarities in the attacks from what they saw in Texas compared to what he was reading that was occurring up in Michigan and as well as in Ontario. After being constantly hounded by Michigan authorities, Carl decided he had too much heat on him and decided to go back to Texas before being caught. Once he was back in Texas, though, Carl started killing again, and it was a very alarming rate this time. He killed 11 women in just the Houston area alone in about a 1-year time span. The murders were either done by stabbing or by drowning the women in their own bathtubs after he assaulted them at their doorsteps. His big mistake in Texas was trying to assault 2 women at the same time. One escaped and went for help as he tried to drown the second in her own bathtub. Both women survived the attack, and the first one was able to get away and was able to contact the police and get the police to respond to the address, and they were able to take him into custody. While in custody for the assaults, Watts started to confess to upward of 80 murders. Watts gets detectives to agree to an unheard of deal. He would plead guilty to burglary with the intent to commit murder in exchange for taking murder charges and the death penalty off the table, as well as he also had to show them either the locations or provide them with details related to the other murders so they can either prove or deny what he was actually saying. Due to this charge of taking the murder off the table and pleading guilty to burglary with the intent, he was only sentenced to 60 years in prison, which is kind of surprising in Texas with how strict a lot of the laws are. And he was only sentenced to 60 years. He only ended up having to serve a fraction of the time due to, in the state of Texas, they had at this point a good behavior deal that was in the process. If a prisoner was a model inmate, he could shave time off of his sentence one day for so many days were deducted off his sentence. So, ultimately, he only served 20 years of his 60-year sentence. This also made Watts the first serial killer ever to be released from prison in the United States. But when Michigan found out about the upcoming release of Watts, Michigan's Attorney General put out a plea to the public to come forward with information in the hopes of prosecuting Watts and preventing him from being freed. While Texas may have a plea deal with Watts, the state of Michigan does not have to agree to it since they are a separate state. A witness came forward, and while Watts was being walked out of a Texas prison, he was then extradited to Michigan, and he was sentenced to life in prison in December 2004 for one murder, and then he was sentenced again to another life sentence in July of 2007 for a second murder. Ultimately, 2 life sentences for Watts was not as long and deserving as Watts' victims and their families would have wanted. 2 months after his 2007 murder conviction, Carl Watts was transferred to a medical prison, and that is where he died from prostate cancer later that year.